He was a newly married millionaire, surrounded by luxury and confidence. A child nobody ever noticed saw everything that was about to collapse. "She's destroying your company," whispered the maid's daughter, and that sentence was the beginning of the end, or the beginning of salvation. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Stay tuned. The marble floors of the Whitmore mansion gleamed under the morning light, reflecting the grandeur that had taken decades to build. Every corner of the estate whispered power, from the sweeping staircases to the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls from the vaulted ceilings. But beneath the polished surface, something dark was stirring, invisible to everyone except a pair of innocent blue eyes. Charlotte wiped down the banister with careful strokes, her hands moving in the practiced rhythm of someone who had cleaned these halls for years. Her daughter Emma sat on the bottom step, swinging her legs and humming a tune only she could hear. The little girl wore her favorite red shirt, the one with the cartoon bear on the front, and her blonde hair was pulled into two messy pigtails. "Emma, sweetheart, stay close to me today," Charlotte said softly, glancing at her daughter with a mixture of affection and concern. The child nodded, but her attention was already drifting. She loved exploring the mansion, discovering hidden nooks and forgotten rooms. To her, it was a castle, and she was the brave knight searching for treasure. Charlotte returned to her work, moving toward the kitchen to gather more supplies. Emma, left alone for just a moment, spotted the cleaning cart at the end of the hallway. She thought she could help her mother by bringing it closer. With determined steps, she walked toward it, her small hands reaching for the handle. But as she turned the corner into the grand salon, she heard voices, low, urgent, secretive. Emma froze. Through the partially open door, she saw Mrs. Whitmore, the lady of the house, standing with a man Emma had never seen before. He was tall, with slicked-back hair and a sharp suit that looked too tight. His face was stern, and his eyes darted around the room as if checking for witnesses. "We need to move faster," the man said, his voice clipped and impatient. "The stocks are already in motion. By the end of the month, everything will be liquidated, and he will not even know until it is too late." Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms, her expression cold and calculating. "I have been careful, Richard. Every transaction is buried under layers of shell companies. My husband trusts me completely. He has no idea." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She did not understand all the words, but she understood the tone. It was the same tone her mother used when she warned Emma not to touch the hot stove. Danger. "What about the staff?" Richard asked. "Do any of them suspect?" "They are invisible to me," Mrs. Whitmore replied with a dismissive wave, "especially that cleaning woman and her little brat. They see nothing, hear nothing, and even if they did, who would believe them?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, but her shoe scraped against the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent hallway. "What was that?" Richard snapped, his head whipping toward the door. Emma did not wait. She turned and ran, her small feet slapping against the floor as she raced back toward her mother. Her heart felt like it was going to burst out of her chest, and tears stung her eyes. She found Charlotte in the laundry room, folding towels with mechanical precision. Emma crashed into her mother's legs, wrapping her arms around her waist and burying her face in the fabric of her apron. "Emma, what is wrong?" Charlotte asked, immediately dropping the towel and kneeling to her daughter's level. Her hands cupped Emma's tear-streaked face. "Talk to me, baby." "What happened?" "I heard them, Mama," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "The lady and a man. They were talking about taking everything from Mr. Whitmore. They said bad things. They said, 'We do not matter.'" Charlotte's blood ran cold. She pulled Emma closer, her mind racing. Who was the man? What exactly had her daughter heard? And more importantly, how much danger were they in now? "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Charlotte asked gently, trying to keep her voice calm even as panic clawed at her insides. "What exactly did they say?" Emma repeated the words as best as she could remember, her child's vocabulary stumbling over terms like liquidated and shell companies. But the essence was clear. Mrs. Whitmore was stealing from her husband, and she had an accomplice. Charlotte felt the weight of the secret settle on her shoulders like a boulder. She was just a housekeeper, a single mother trying to make ends meet. She had no power, no influence, no voice in this world of wealth and privilege. But her daughter had stumbled onto something that could destroy a man's empire, and now they were both in danger. "We need to be very careful," Charlotte said, her voice firm but gentle. "You cannot tell anyone else about this, Emma. Not yet. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her blue eyes wide and trusting. For the rest of the day, Charlotte kept Emma close, never letting her out of sight. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, her mind spinning with fear and uncertainty. Every time she passed Mrs. Whitmore in the hallway, her heart skipped a beat. The woman's smile was as cold as ever, her demeanor flawless, but Charlotte could see the calculation behind her eyes now. That evening, as Charlotte prepared to leave, she saw Mr. Whitmore for the first time that day. Jonathan Whitmore was a man in his early 50s, with silver hair and a commanding presence that filled every room he entered. He had built his empire from nothing, turning a small tech startup into a multinational corporation. But lately he looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been a year ago. He was standing in his study, staring at a stack of financial reports spread across his desk. His brow was furrowed and his jaw was tight. Charlotte hesitated in the doorway, her hand gripping Emma's tightly. She wanted to say something, to warn him, but the words stuck in her throat. What if he did not believe her? What if he thought she was trying to manipulate him? What if Mrs. Whitmore found out and retaliated? "Mr. Whitmore, is everything all right?" Charlotte asked softly. He looked up, startled, as if he had forgotten anyone else existed. "Oh, Charlotte." "Yes, just some irregularities in the quarterly reports. Nothing to worry about." But his eyes told a different story. He was worried, deeply worried, and he had no idea that the threat was not coming from outside his company, but from within his own home. Charlotte nodded and left, her heart heavy with the burden of knowledge she could not share. That night, Emma could not sleep. She tossed and turned in her small bed, her mind replaying the scene in the salon over and over again. She thought about Mr. Whitmore, who had always been kind to her, who sometimes smiled when he saw her drawing pictures in the corner of the kitchen. She did not want him to lose everything. The next morning Emma woke early. She found her mother already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Charlotte looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. "Mama," Emma said quietly, climbing into her mother's lap, "we have to tell him." Charlotte closed her eyes, her arms wrapping around her daughter. "I know, baby, I know, but telling him was easier said than done. How could she, a mere housekeeper, approach one of the most powerful men in the city and accuse his wife of betrayal? And what proof did she have? The word of a 6-year-old child?" The answer came later that day, in the most unexpected way. Jonathan Whitmore was walking through the mansion, his mind preoccupied with the financial anomalies that had been plaguing his company for months. Stocks were being sold without his authorization. Funds were being moved to accounts he did not recognize, and key documents kept disappearing from his office. As he passed through the hallway, he saw Emma sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. She looked up at him, her blue eyes filled with a seriousness that seemed far too old for her age. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. He stopped, surprised. "Yes, Emma." She hesitated, her small hands clutching the crayon tightly. "I saw something. Something bad." Jonathan knelt down, his expression gentle. "What did you see, sweetheart?" Emma glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. Then, in a whisper, she told him everything. Jonathan's face went pale. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment he could not breathe. But then he looked into Emma's eyes and saw nothing but honesty and fear. This child had no reason to lie, no motive to deceive. She was simply telling him what she had seen. "Thank you, Emma," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You are very brave." But even as he stood and walked away, doubt gnawed at him. Could it be true? Could the woman he had shared his life with for over a decade be capable of such betrayal? That evening, Jonathan received an anonymous email. It contained a single line of text and no signature. "Do not trust the child. The mother is using her to manipulate you. Check the staff records." Jonathan stared at the message, his mind reeling. Was this a warning? Or was it a trap? He did not know who had sent it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He spent the night reviewing Charlotte's employment records, looking for anything suspicious. But there was nothing. She was a model employee, hard-working and honest, with no history of misconduct. Still, the doubt lingered. The next day, Jonathan found himself watching Emma and Charlotte more closely. He saw the way Charlotte held her daughter protectively, the way Emma's eyes darted nervously whenever Mrs. Whitmore entered the room. He saw fear, not deception, and then he made his decision. That evening he called Charlotte into his study. "Emma, are you absolutely certain about what you told me?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Emma nodded, her blue eyes unwavering. "I heard them, Mr. Whitmore, I promise." Jonathan looked at Charlotte. "And you believe her?" Charlotte met his, gaze without flinching. "Every word, sir." Jonathan took a deep breath. "Then I need your help, both of you. But you must trust me, and I must trust you. Can we do that?" Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." And so, an unlikely alliance was formed. A powerful businessman, a humble housekeeper, and a 6-year-old girl, united by a single truth that could change everything. Over the next few days, Jonathan Whitmore became a man on a mission. He moved through his days with a new sense of purpose, his mind sharp and focused. But he did not act rashly. He knew that if his wife was truly orchestrating this betrayal, she would have covered her tracks meticulously. He needed proof, solid and undeniable. He started by hiring a private cybersecurity firm, one that specialized in corporate espionage and financial fraud. He told them to dig into every transaction, every account, every digital footprint connected to his company. He did not mention his wife, not yet, but he gave them enough information to start uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, Charlotte and Emma continued their daily routines, but the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted. Charlotte could feel eyes on her, a cold, calculating gaze that followed her wherever she went. Mrs. Whitmore had always been distant, but now there was something else in her expression: suspicion. One afternoon, as Charlotte was cleaning the upstairs hallway, Mrs. Whitmore appeared at the top of the stairs. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than Charlotte made in a year. "Charlotte," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice smooth as silk, "I have been meaning to speak with you." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "Yes, ma'am. I have noticed that your daughter has been spending quite a bit of time wandering around the house lately. I think it would be best if she stayed in the staff quarters from now on. For her own safety, of course." The threat was veiled, but Charlotte heard it loud and clear. Mrs. Whitmore was trying to isolate Emma, to keep her away from places where she might overhear more conversations. "I understand, ma'am," Charlotte said carefully. "I will make sure she stays close to me." Mrs. Whitmore smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Good. I would hate for anything unfortunate to happen." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. She nodded and turned away, her hands trembling as she gripped the cleaning cloth. That evening, Charlotte found Emma in the small room they shared in the staff wing. The child was sitting on the bed, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, her blue eyes wide and frightened. "Mama, I do not like the lady anymore," Emma whispered. "She scares me." Charlotte sat down beside her daughter and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I know, baby. But we are going to be okay. Mr. Whitmore is going to help us," but even as she said the words, Charlotte could not shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could send them plummeting. The next day, Mrs. Whitmore made another move. She approached Emma directly, something she had never done before. Charlotte was in the kitchen when it happened, and by the time she realized her daughter was missing, panic had already set in. She found Emma in the library, standing in front of Mrs. Whitmore, who was holding out a beautifully wrapped box. "This is for you, Emma," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "A little gift because you are such a good girl." Emma stared at the box but did not reach for it. She remembered what her mother had told her. Do not take anything from strangers. And right now, Mrs. Whitmore felt like a stranger. "No, thank you," Emma said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. But then it was back, smooth and practiced. "Are you sure? It is a very special doll. I think you would love it." Emma shook her head, taking a step back. "I do not want it." Before Mrs. Whitmore could respond, Charlotte appeared in the doorway. "Emma, there you are. Come along, sweetheart. We have work to do." Emma ran to her mother, and Charlotte scooped her up, holding her protectively. She met Mrs. Whitmore's gaze for a brief moment, and in that instant both women understood. They were enemies now, locked in a silent battle for survival. Mrs. Whitmore set the box down on the table, her expression unreadable. "Of course. Do not let me keep you." Charlotte carried Emma out of the library, her heart pounding. That night she barely slept, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Mrs. Whitmore tried to hurt Emma? What if she found a way to silence them both? But Jonathan Whitmore was not idle. The cybersecurity firm had begun to uncover a trail of digital breadcrumbs, transactions that led to offshore accounts and shell companies. And then they found the name, Richard Calloway. Jonathan's blood ran cold when he saw it. Richard Calloway had been his business partner 15 years ago, back when the company was just starting to take off. But Richard had been reckless, cutting corners and making deals that put the entire operation at risk. Jonathan had been forced to buy him out, severing their partnership before it could destroy everything they had built. Richard had never forgiven him. Now, it seemed, Richard had found a way to exact his revenge. He had wormed his way into Jonathan's life through his wife, exploiting her greed and resentment to orchestrate the perfect betrayal. Jonathan called an emergency meeting with his legal team and his most trusted board members. He laid out the evidence, piece by piece, showing them the web of deceit that had been spun around his company. And then he told them about Emma, the 6-year-old girl who had seen it all. At first there was skepticism. How could they trust the word of a child? But Jonathan was adamant. "She has no reason to lie," he said firmly, "and everything she told me has been corroborated by the evidence we have found." The board agreed to move forward. Legal proceedings were initiated, and within days Mrs. Whitmore and Richard Calloway were served with formal accusations of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back rows, cameras flashing as Jonathan entered with his legal team. Mrs. Whitmore sat on the opposite side, her expression icy and composed, Richard beside her with a smug smile on his face. Charlotte and Emma were not in the courtroom. Jonathan had insisted they stay away, fearing for their safety. But their testimony had been recorded, and it would be presented as evidence. The proceedings were brutal. Jonathan's lawyers presented a mountain of evidence, financial records, emails, and digital transactions that painted a clear picture of betrayal. Richard's involvement was undeniable, his fingerprints all over the fraudulent accounts, but Mrs. Whitmore's defense team fought back hard. They attacked the credibility of the evidence, suggesting that it had been fabricated or misinterpreted. And then they went after Emma. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, standing with theatrical flair, "the prosecution's case hinges on the testimony of a 6-year-old child, a child who could easily have been coached, manipulated, or simply mistaken. Children have vivid imaginations. They do not always understand what they see or hear." Jonathan felt his jaw tighten. He wanted to stand up and shout to defend Emma's honor, but his lawyer placed a calming hand on his arm. The judge reviewed the recorded testimony, watching the video of Emma speaking in her small, earnest voice. The child's sincerity was undeniable, her fear palpable. And when the financial evidence was laid out alongside her words, the correlation was impossible to ignore. After hours of deliberation, the judge returned with a verdict. Mrs. Whitmore and Richard Calloway were found guilty on multiple counts. Their assets were frozen, their access to Jonathan's company revoked, and they were ordered to pay restitution. Jonathan felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tinged with sadness. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him in the most fundamental way. But he had survived, and he had Emma to thank for it. When Jonathan returned to the mansion that evening, He found Charlotte and Emma waiting for him in the foyer. Emma's eyes were wide with worry, and Charlotte looked exhausted. "Is it over?" Charlotte asked quietly. Jonathan nodded. "It is over. You are safe now. Both of you." Emma ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "I was scared, Mr. Whitmore." Jonathan knelt down, pulling the child into a gentle hug. "I know, Emma, but you were so brave. You saved me. You saved everything." Over the following weeks, the mansion felt different. The cold, oppressive atmosphere that had hung over it for so long began to lift. Mrs. Whitmore was gone, her belongings removed, her presence erased, and in her absence something new began to grow. Jonathan found himself spending more time with Charlotte and Emma. He started joining them for simple meals in the kitchen, something he had never done before. He listened to Emma's stories about her drawings and her dreams, and he found himself smiling more than he had in years. Charlotte, for her part, was cautious. She had been hurt before, abandoned by people who had promised to care for her. She did not want to let her guard down, did not want to believe that this powerful man could genuinely care about her and her daughter. But Jonathan was patient. He did not push, did not demand. He simply showed up day after day, proving through his actions that he was sincere. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Emma playing with her bear nearby, Jonathan turned to Charlotte. "I have been thinking," he said, quietly. "This mansion is too big, too empty. It has never felt like a home. But when you and Emma are here, it feels different. It feels alive." Charlotte looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of deception. "What are you saying, Mr. Whitmore?" "I am saying that I do not want you to be just my employee anymore," Jonathan said. "I want you to be part of my life, both of you. I want to build something real, something honest. A family." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of this, of a life where Emma could grow up safe and loved, where she did not have to worry about making ends meet, but she had never imagined it could come true. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan reached out and took her hand. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Emma looked up from her play, sensing the shift in the air. She ran over and climbed into Jonathan's lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Does this mean you are going to be my family now?" she asked, her blue eyes shining with hope. Jonathan smiled, his heart full. "Yes, Emma, if that is what you want." Emma nodded vigorously. "I want that. I want that a lot." And so, in the garden of the grand mansion, a new family was born, not bound by blood, but by trust, courage, and love. The months that followed were filled with healing and growth. Jonathan restructured his company, bringing in new leadership and implementing safeguards to prevent future betrayals. He also established a foundation in Emma's name, dedicated to helping children in need, ensuring that her bravery would inspire others. Charlotte enrolled in night classes, pursuing a degree in business management. Jonathan supported her every step of the way, encouraging her to dream bigger and reach higher. Emma thrived, her laughter filling the halls of the mansion, her drawings covering the walls of what had once been cold, empty rooms. And Jonathan, for the first time in his life, understood what it meant to truly come home. 6 months had passed since the trial, and the Whitmore mansion had transformed into something unrecognizable from its former self. The cold marble halls now echoed with laughter. The once pristine rooms bore the cheerful chaos of a child's presence, and the kitchen had become the heart of the home rather than just a workspace. Emma sat at the grand dining table, her legs swinging beneath her chair as she concentrated on her homework. Her tongue poked out slightly as she carefully wrote her letters, determined to make them perfect. Jonathan sat beside her, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a contract, but his attention kept drifting to the little girl beside him. Charlotte entered carrying a tray with hot chocolate and cookies, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched the scene. This was her life now, but some days it still felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "How is the homework coming along, sweetheart?" Charlotte asked, setting the tray down. Emma looked up, her blue eyes bright. I am almost done, Mama. Mr. Whitmore has been helping me with the hard words. Jonathan, Emma, Charlotte said gently. You can call him Jonathan now. We talked about this. But Emma shook her head, her expression serious. He is too important to just call by his name. Maybe when I am bigger. Jonathan felt his chest tighten with emotion. He reached over and ruffled Emma's hair affectionately. You can call me whatever makes you comfortable, little one. Charlotte poured the hot chocolate, but her movements were stiff, uncertain. Despite everything that had happened, despite the warmth and security that now surrounded them, she still struggled with her place in this new reality. She was no longer just the housekeeper, but she was not quite sure what she was instead. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Charlotte found herself standing in the doorway of what used to be the formal living room. Jonathan had converted it into a study space for her, complete with a desk, bookshelves, and a comfortable reading chair. Her textbooks were stacked neatly, evidence of the business degree she was pursuing. You have been quiet today, Jonathan said, appearing behind her. Is something troubling you? Charlotte turned to face him, her expression conflicted. I have been thinking about all of this, about how much has changed. Jonathan stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. And that worries you? Sometimes I wonder if I belong here, Charlotte admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma and I, we come from such a different world. What if one day you wake up and realize this was all a mistake? What if we are just a reminder of everything that went wrong? Jonathan reached out and gently took her hands in his. Charlotte, look at me. You and Emma are not reminders of what went wrong. You are proof of what went right. You saved me, not just my company, but me. You showed me what real courage looks like, what real family means. But I am still just a housekeeper who got lucky, Charlotte said, tears threatening to spill. I do not know how to be part of your world. Then we will figure it out together, Jonathan said firmly. I do not want you to become someone else. I want you exactly as you are. And this is not my world anymore. It is our world. Yours, mine, and Emma's. Before Charlotte could respond, a sound from upstairs made them both freeze. It was Emma, crying out in her sleep. They rushed upstairs together, finding the little girl tangled in her sheets, tears streaming down her face. Mama, she whimpered, reaching out. Charlotte gathered her daughter into her arms, rocking her gently. I am here, baby. You are safe. It was just a bad dream. The lady was back, Emma sobbed. She was trying to take me away from you. Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed, his heart breaking for this brave little girl who still carried the weight of what she had witnessed. Emma, Mrs. Whitmore cannot hurt you anymore. She is gone, and she is never coming back. I promise you. Emma looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. You promise for real? I promise for real, Jonathan said solemnly, and I am going to make sure you and your mama are protected, always. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Jonathan was in his home office when his assistant called to inform him that Richard Calloway was requesting a meeting. Jonathan's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity got the better of him. Richard looked different from the last time Jonathan had seen him in court. The smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. He was thinner, his suit less expensive, his eyes tired. I know I have no right to be here, Richard began, standing awkwardly in the doorway. But I needed to see you, to apologize. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You orchestrated the theft of millions of dollars from my company, Richard. You tried to destroy everything I built. And you think an apology will fix that? No, Richard said quickly. I know it will not fix anything. But I need you to understand why I did it. When you bought me out all those years ago, I felt betrayed. I thought we were partners, brothers even. I let that anger consume me, and I made terrible choices. You involved my wife, Jonathan said coldly. You turned her against me. She was already turning, Richard admitted. I just gave her the tools. But that does not excuse what I did. I have spent the last 6 months in therapy, trying to understand why I let revenge become my entire purpose. And I realized that I threw away my life for nothing. You were right to remove me from the company. I was reckless and dangerous." Jonathan studied the man before him, trying to reconcile this broken figure with the cocky partner he had once known. "What do you want from me, Richard?" "Nothing," Richard said. "I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I am glad you survived what I tried to do to you. I heard about the little girl who exposed us. She must be remarkable." "She is," Jonathan said, his voice softening slightly. "She saved everything." After Richard left, Jonathan sat in silence for a long time. Forgiveness was not something that came easily to him, but he understood now that holding on to anger would only poison the happiness he had found. He would never forget what Richard had done, but perhaps in time he could let go of the hatred. That weekend, Jonathan made a decision. He called Charlotte and Emma into the study, his expression serious but warm. "I have been thinking about our family," he began, "and I realize that we have been living in a kind of limbo. You are not employees, but we have not defined what you are to me, what I am to you." Emma climbed onto his lap, her small hands resting on his chest. "You are our family," she said simply. Jonathan smiled. "Yes, I am. And I want to make that official. Charlotte, I would like your permission to legally adopt Emma. I want to be her father, not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Jonathan, are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Jonathan said. "And Charlotte, I want you to know that I love you. I am not asking you to marry me right now because I want you to finish your degree and find your own footing in this new life. But when you are ready, I will be here, waiting." Charlotte could not speak. She simply nodded, her heart too full for words. The adoption process took several months, but finally the day arrived. Emma stood in the courtroom, wearing a new blue dress that Jonathan had bought for the occasion. The judge smiled down at her kindly. "Emma, do you understand what adoption means?" the judge asked. Emma nodded seriously. "It means that Mr. Whitmore will be my daddy forever, even when things are hard." The judge's smile widened. "That is exactly right. And do you want that?" "Yes," Emma said firmly. "I want that very much." The gavel came down, and just like that, Femma Charlotte Whitmore became official. Jonathan scooped her up in his arms, spinning her around as she giggled with pure joy. Charlotte watched them, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the strange and beautiful journey that had brought them to this moment. That evening they celebrated with a small party in the garden. Emma ran through the grass, chasing fireflies, her laughter ringing out like music. Jonathan and Charlotte sat together on a bench, watching her. "Thank you," Charlotte said softly, "for giving her this life, for giving us this life." Jonathan took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Thank you for trusting me, for believing that I could be part of your family." As the sun set over the mansion, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the three of them sat together, a family forged not by blood or circumstance, but by courage, trust, and love. And in that moment, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Emma looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Do you think the stars know we are happy?" she asked. Jonathan smiled. "I think the whole universe knows, sweetheart." And in the garden of the grand mansion, surrounded by the people she loved most, Emma closed her eyes and made a wish. Not for anything to change, but for this moment, this feeling, to last forever.